Ross, he's your son. The elevator froze. Ross Callahan, billionaire, heart racing, stared at the little boy in Lena's arms, a boy who looked exactly like him. His fiancée froze. His mother's voice thundered in his ear, and secrets buried for years threatened to shatter everything. Would Ross choose love, or would he lose his world forever? Watch to see the shocking truth that changes everything in an instant. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where are you listening from today? I want you to stay with me till the very end, because this story, it's going to touch your heart in ways you won't forget. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our emotional, thrilling stories. All right, let's dive in. The elevator of Skyrise Tower slid open with a soft, luxurious chime, the kind that felt rehearsed, polished, expensive, and perfectly timed to match the rhythm of the building's elite atmosphere. Ross Callahan stepped inside as if the elevator belonged to him, which in many ways it did. Half the companies in the skyscraper were signed under his name or owed their growth to his investments. His suit was cut from fabric so fine it barely wrinkled when he moved, and his presence alone carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to commanding rooms, markets, and people. Victoria, his fiancée, stood pressed elegantly at his side, the sharp scent of her designer perfume trailing in the air as she slipped her manicured hand over his arm. Her posture screamed ambition, her eyes held pride, and her smile belonged to someone who had already calculated the exact spotlight angles for their future wedding photos. Ross barely noticed. He was focused on his watch, checking the time as he mentally sorted through the meeting agenda for the morning, each detail crisp and controlled. He liked controlled. He lived in controlled. He thrived in it until the elevator doors hesitated and opened again. A blur of movement rushed inside. A woman breathing hard, cheeks flushed, curls messy from the wind, stumbled in while clutching a small boy who clung to her like he was afraid of slipping between realities. The elevator sensors beeped in protest as she barely made it inside before the doors shut behind her with a metallic sigh. Ross turned instinctively to glance at whoever had interrupted the smooth flow of his morning. But whatever irritation he expected to feel evaporated instantly. His chest tightened, breath stalled, and for a brief second he felt as if the ground beneath him tilted. "Lena," he said, the name leaving his lips with a rawness that didn't match the polished world he lived in now. Victoria's head snapped toward him at the strange tone in his voice, but Ross didn't see her. He couldn't. His gaze was locked on the woman in front of him. Lena straightened slowly, as though gathering whatever strength she had left. The elevator's bright white lights washed over her stunning brown skin, highlighting the curve of her jaw, the softness of her cheeks, and the quiet fire glowing in her eyes. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to impress a billionaire. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her jeans were worn, her top simple, and her expression held a tiredness that suggested long nights, heavy responsibilities, and battles no one else had witnessed. Yet she radiated something far stronger: dignity, resilience, and a calmness powerful enough to make the air in the elevator shift around her. "Don't say my name like you're surprised," she whispered, and that whisper hit harder than any shout could have. It carried history, disappointment, memory, and an edge, sharpened by 3 years of silence. Ross stared at her, but the shock didn't fully settle until he looked at the child she was holding. The boy's small hand gripped the collar of her shirt, and when he lifted his head, Ross felt the floor tilt again. The child had bright, warm eyes Ross recognized too well. They were the same shape, the same deep focus, the same subtle intensity Ross had seen in photos of himself as a toddler. The boy's eyebrows had that same stubborn angle, and even the way he held his jaw mirrored Ross's childhood expressions. A living reflection, a silent truth. Ross's heartbeat hammered in his chest as he took half a step forward, not even aware he had moved. Who is he?" he asked, voice low, strained, like a man bracing for an impact. Lena tightened her hold on the boy, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly, though her voice remained steady. "Your son." She didn't add anything else. No explanation, no apology, no justification, just two words that cut through every sanitized, controlled piece of Ross's life and shattered it. Victoria stiffened instantly, her manicured nails digging sharply into Ross's forearm. Her perfect posture faltered. Her eyes widened in disbelief, disgust, or maybe fear. Ross didn't look long enough to figure it out. His gaze was on the boy, on the possibility, on the sudden collision of timelines he thought never would meet again. Before Ross could ask anything else, before Victoria could snap, before Lena could say more, before the boy could even blink, the elevator gave a violent shudder. The metal walls groaned under strain, the floor jolted beneath their feet, and the lights flickered in a rapid, disoriented stutter. The boy gasped and tightened his tiny arms around Lena's neck. Victoria screamed, grabbing the railing with both hands. Ross steadied himself instinctively, his hand shooting toward the nearest surface, anything to ground the sudden chaos. But even as the elevator shook, his attention stayed locked on the two people standing across from him. One he never expected to see again, one he didn't know existed until seconds ago. His pulse raced in a rhythm that didn't match the elevator's malfunction. Something deeper, heavier, far more personal was unraveling inside him. The lights flickered again, this time slower, weaker, before clicking off entirely. The elevator fell into complete darkness, swallowing them whole. A small, frightened whimper came from the child, echoing louder in the tight, metallic enclosure. Lena whispered something soothing, her voice a soft hum that trembled but still wrapped around the boy protectively. Victoria panted somewhere on Ross's right, muttering curses under her breath. A faint emergency bulb blinked on, barely illuminating their faces with a dim red glow, casting their shadows upward like ghostly silhouettes pinned to the metal walls. Ross wasn't a man easily shaken, but in that eerie, suffocating half-darkness, with his past standing inches from him and a child he didn't know he had, breathing in quick, soft gasps, he felt shaken. He reached out blindly, unsure if he was reaching for balance or grounding or something else entirely. His fingers brushed against someone's warm skin, tense muscles, and the contact sent a sharp jolt through him. The air thickened instantly. The silent tension grew heavier, pressing into every inch of the elevator, as if the truth itself was taking up space. Victoria caught her breath sharply when she saw the faint outline of Ross's hand touching Lena's arm. But Ross didn't pull away immediately. The elevator creaked ominously overhead, like wires straining, like steel protesting. The sound sent a ripple of fear through the small space. Ross whispered into the dimness, his voice barely steady. "Lena, what is happening right now?" Her answer was soft, pained, and nothing like what he expected. "Everything you were never prepared for." Another groan from the elevator. Another tightening in Ross's chest. And for the first time in a very long time, Ross Callahan, man of control, power, and precision, felt the terrifying truth settle over him. His entire life had already begun to change the moment she stepped in, and the darkness made sure there was no escape from it. The elevator snapped downward an inch. The sudden drop, making the little boy cry out right as a voice crackled over the intercom. But only half the words came through, leaving them unsure whether help was coming. The elevator hung in an uneasy stillness after that unsettling jolt, suspended somewhere between floors, the dim emergency bulb casting a deep, blood-red glow across everyone's faces. The light wasn't bright enough to make anyone comfortable, just enough to reveal fear in raw, unforgiving detail. Isaiah whimpered against Lena's shoulder, his tiny fingers gripping the fabric of her shirt like he sensed something was terribly wrong. Ross, still steadier than the others but clearly shaken, stared at Lena through the flickering haze, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. His life had always operated on certainty, predictability, logic, but nothing in this cramped metal box obeyed logic anymore. The intercom remained dead silent now, crackling like someone on the other side had cut the connection or never intended to speak again. Lena swallowed hard, tightening her hold on Isaiah as Ross's voice finally broke through the thick, trapped air like a steel blade slicing through fog. "Lena," he said, his tone low, controlled, but trembling underneath in a way he couldn't disguise. "Look at me. Did you just say he's my son?" Lena slowly lifted her gaze, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and a strength Ross hadn't seen in her years ago, a strength forged from isolation, sacrifice, and the loneliness of raising a child on her own. The emergency light deepened the shadows under her eyes, but her voice was steady, even as her arms adjusted protectively around the little boy. "Yes, Ross," she whispered, her voice soft but unshakable, like she had rehearsed this truth 100 times, but never imagined saying it here, trapped above the city with nowhere to run. "His name is Isaiah. He's 3. Ross felt the words hit him straight in the chest, not gently, not slowly, but with the force of something that had been waiting years to confront him. Victoria reacted instantly, the sharpness in her voice slicing through the tension like broken glass. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her breath coming short and fast as her composure cracked. "She's obviously lying. This is a stunt, Ross. A desperate one." The bitterness in her voice bounced off the steel walls, echoing louder than intended. Lena turned toward Victoria, moving only her head, while keeping Isaiah shielded with her body. Her expression didn't break. Her voice didn't shake. Instead, she delivered a cold, calm look that made Victoria's bravado shrink in an instant. "He has your eyes, Ross," Lena said, not even granting Victoria a glance now. "And your stubborn eyebrows too." Ross couldn't deny it. He didn't even try. Instead, he lowered himself slowly to his knees, the expensive fabric of his suit meeting the dirty elevator floor without hesitation. He crouched right in front of the little boy, ignoring the way Victoria hissed his name, as if kneeling in front of another woman's child was some kind of betrayal. Ross didn't look at her. Couldn't. His attention was locked entirely on the small figure partially hidden behind Lena's shoulder. "Isaiah," Ross whispered, his voice softer than Lena had ever heard it, a softness that lived somewhere between awe and fear. "Can I see your face?" The boy hesitated, pressing himself tighter against Lena at first, small fingers curling into her shirt. But then, slowly, so slowly, Ross felt each second stretch painfully across his chest. Isaiah peeked his head out, his eyes lifted toward Ross, wide, glossy with confusion, fear, and innocence. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. And then the resemblance slammed into Ross with a force that left his breath trapped in his throat. Those eyes, that expression, that small crease between the brows, he had seen it in every childhood photo he hated, in every mirror reflection he couldn't escape, in every memory of arguments with his father when he tried to stay strong but was secretly terrified. It wasn't just resemblance, it was undeniable, unavoidable, unshakable. Ross's breath trembled, his jaw clenched, his lashes blinked rapidly as the reality pushed through every layer of denial he might have had. "Lena," he exhaled, the anger mixing with heartbreak, confusion, and 1,000 questions that had no room to breathe. "Why didn't you tell me? Why?" His voice cracked, not loudly, but with a rawness he never let anyone hear. It cut straight into the heart of the small space, and even Victoria felt the shift, swallowing her next insult like her mouth had gone dry. But before Lena could answer, the elevator jerked violently again. This time, the floor dropped a fraction of an inch faster, then slammed to a stop, sending a scream from Victoria and a burst of frightened tears from Isaiah. The walls groaned under the strain, metal bending in protest like something was pulling from above. Lena instantly clutched Isaiah to her chest, whispering calming words into his hair, even though her own heartbeat thundered with fear. Ross instinctively reached forward, not to protect himself, not to steady Victoria, but toward Lena and Isaiah, his hand hovering near them like a shield waiting to be used. The elevator swayed slightly, then settled, though the tension in the air didn't. Ross watched Lena wipe a tear from Isaiah's cheek, her fingers gentle, her voice steady despite the danger in closing them. She looked up slowly, her eyes meeting Ross's with a mixture of fear and truth she couldn't hide anymore. "Because," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of failing machinery. Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick, dark, impossible to ignore. Ross blinked, his mind instantly tightening around the implication hidden inside her voice. Destroyed him? Back then? What truth? What circumstances? What happened 3 years ago that she believed would break him? He stared at her like she had just opened a door he didn't know existed. Victoria stiffened at the phrasing, her eyes darting between them as suspicion and fear flickered across her perfect features. The elevator creaked again, but this time the sound was lower, almost like a warning groan from deep inside the shaft. Isaiah clung to Lena's shoulder, whimpering softly as the emergency bulb flickered once, threatening to plunge them into full darkness again. Ross leaned closer, his voice low, dangerous, demanding. "Lena, what does that mean?" But Lena didn't answer. She couldn't, because the next sound wasn't machinery. It was a faint, muffled thump coming from above the elevator roof. A sound none of them expected, a sound that tightened every nerve in Ross's spine, a sound that made Isaiah bury his face deeper into Lena's chest, a sound that suggested they weren't as alone in that broken elevator as they thought. Something or someone moved above the elevator, and the cable gave another warning groan, forcing Ross to rise from the floor as another truth he wasn't ready for hovered on the edge of being revealed. The elevator shuddered again, and Ross's jaw tightened as every fiber of his being strained with anticipation, fear, and disbelief. He had knelt moments ago, staring into his son's eyes, and now the weight of the truth pressed down on him like the steel walls surrounding them. The dim red glow from the emergency light cast jagged shadows across the walls, flickering with every tremor, every metallic groan. Ross's fists clenched at his sides, the power that had always been his armor suddenly feeling inadequate against the storm of revelation that Lena's presence had ignited. He stared at her, every muscle taut with a mix of rage and desperation, his mind racing at a speed that left his body buzzing with tension. "Destroyed me. Try again." "Lena," he said, his voice sharp, low, and edged with the disbelief of a man who had never been prepared to face betrayal of this magnitude. His words lingered in the heavy air, vibrating against the walls of the elevator, carrying the weight of the past and the uncertainty of what was to come. Lena's lips trembled, but she held herself still, her hands clutching Isaiah tighter as if the boy's safety anchored her courage. Her gaze flicked down briefly, tracing the curve of his jaw, the sharpness in his eyes, the features that belonged only to Ross, reflected in their son. "You remember the night your father had that stroke?" she whispered, her voice almost a prayer against the harsh metallic hum of the stalled elevator. "When the board threatened to remove you. You were drowning, Ross, and the man who sent threats to me said you'd lose everything if you knew about the baby." The words spilled out, fragile, yet unrelenting, a delicate yet lethal mixture of truth and accusation that pierced through the controlled armor Ross had spent decades building. Each syllable carried years of concealed pain, sleepless nights, and sacrifices he had never imagined. Ross's heart clenched at the implication, the weight of those lost years pressing down like a vice. He felt the air thicken around him, every breath heavy and desperate, as if the elevator itself had conspired to trap them in a moment of unavoidable reckoning. Victoria, still clutching the edge of the railing, scoffed sharply, her voice dripping with contempt and disbelief. "You expect us to believe some mystery threat?" she snapped, her nails digging into the polished metal as her body trembled not from fear, but from the realization that the carefully constructed world she had counted on was crumbling before her eyes. Her perfect veneer faltered for the first time in months, her polished composure showing cracks as she stepped closer, her eyes darting between Ross and Lena, desperate for validation, for something to cling to. But Lena met Ross's gaze and ignored Victoria entirely, her expression unflinching, her voice steady and cold, the kind of cold that froze time and demanded attention. "It wasn't a stranger," she said. "It was someone close to you." Every word struck Ross harder than the elevator's sudden jerks, every syllable reverberating inside him like a hammer pounding against steel. His breath caught, his chest tightened, and an instinctual chill ran down his spine as he realized the implication that the betrayal, the threats, the manipulation had come not from a shadowy unknown enemy, but from someone intimately tied to the life he had spent his entire adulthood building. Ross froze, the words hanging in the air like lead. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath, trying to reconcile the shock that threatened to unravel every plan, every certainty, every moment of control he had ever held. "Who?" he asked. The single word, barely more than a rasp, weighted with the gravity of 1,000 possibilities he refused to imagine. Yet, now, could not escape. Lena's lips parted, and for the briefest of moments she hesitated, the child clinging to her, shifting slightly, as if sensing the tension radiating from every adult in the cramped space. She bit her bottom lip, a gesture Ross recognized from the past, one she had only ever done when cornered, terrified, or forced to reveal a truth she had spent years protecting. The seconds stretched, heavy and suffocating, every metallic creak of the elevator magnifying the silence. Finally, she whispered the name that Ross had once dreaded, once feared, and yet had never truly imagined could hold so much power over his life. "Your mother." Ross felt as though the world had split into two, jagged edges slicing through his chest as every breath left him in a violent exhale. The elevator groaned again, a long, metallic shiver that made Isaiah cry out softly, curling into Lena's chest for reassurance. Victoria's eyes widened, her entire body stiffening, as if the revelation had physically knocked the air from her lungs. Ross's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the knuckles white against the fabric of his suit, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and betrayal. His mother of all people, the person whose expectations and manipulations had shadowed every major decision of his life, had orchestrated this silence, had controlled the timing of his own father's crises, had dictated the course of his existence without his knowledge, all to manipulate, all to protect an image over a child who was his own blood. His chest tightened, a violent ache that reached down to the pit of his stomach, leaving him dizzy and unsteady even as his brain raced for a response. A plan, any way to confront the truth without losing control entirely. The elevator jolted again, hard this time, metal groaning like a living thing. And Isaiah whimpered, clutching Lena as the world seemed to tilt beneath them. Ross's eyes darted between Lena and Victoria, his body taut with anticipation, rage, and the instinctual drive to protect the son he had only just met. The boy's tiny hand curled into Lena's shirt, and Ross felt the pull in his chest, the undeniable force that no money, power, or control could ever outweigh. Lena's lips trembled as she met his gaze, her voice breaking slightly under the strain, but still firm. "I did what I had to do," she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I protected him. I protected you, even if you didn't know it." Ross's mind screamed against the words, the logic, the betrayal, the love, each element warring with the other, creating a chaos he had never anticipated, never wanted, yet could not ignore. Victoria shifted nervously, sensing the storm about to break, her posture defensive, her voice trembling as she tried to reclaim some sense of authority. "Ross, this is insane," she said, her words sharp, fragile, desperate. "You can't just believe her. She's lying. This is a trick." But Ross didn't answer her, couldn't. His attention was entirely on Lena, on the child, on the revelations that now hung between them like a sword poised to drop. Each metallic creak of the elevator amplified the tension, each flicker of the dim red emergency light painting them in shadows that mirrored the weight of hidden truths. Isaiah's small cry echoed once more, pulling Ross fully back into the moment. He knelt slightly closer, his voice low, raw, but filled with a determination that had always defined him in business, now turned personal. "I will know the truth," he said firmly. Every word deliberate, unwavering. "If what you're saying is real, I will confirm it. I will face it, and I will confront her." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, full of unspoken threats and impossible questions. Lena nodded, her body tense, the child clinging to her, as if sensing the unspoken storm that hovered over every word. The elevator creaked again, almost in response, a warning that seemed to hang in the very air, making every heartbeat echo in the confined metal cage. Victoria's mouth opened to argue, to plead, to assert herself, but no words came. The truth, raw and unstoppable, pressed against every wall, every pulse, every breath. And in that moment, Ross made a silent vow to himself. Nothing would stop him from uncovering the secrets that had been hidden from him. Nothing would protect his son from injustice. And no one, not even his mother, would dictate the course of his family again. The elevator trembled once more, and the weight of imminent confrontation pressed down on everyone, leaving them suspended between fear and revelation, truth and denial, in a tense, breathless pause that promised nothing would ever be the same. The lights flickered violently, Isaiah's soft cry piercing the sudden darkness, and Ross's hand instinctively gripped Lena's shoulder just as the intercom crackled to life, a distorted, chilling voice, murmuring words that made his blood run cold, hinting at truths even deeper than the one he had just learned. The dim emergency light flickered over the tense scene inside the stalled elevator, painting Ross, Lena, Isaiah, and Victoria in jagged shadows that seemed to exaggerate every tense line of their bodies. The metallic hum of the cables above was almost unbearable, each groan echoing through the confined space, amplifying the intensity of the confrontation. Ross had just made a silent vow to uncover the truth about his mother, his attention fully consumed with the revelation that Isaiah was his son, the knowledge crashing into him with the weight of years lost. And yet, even as he processed that, the presence of Victoria beside him became unbearable, a constant reminder of the world he had meticulously built, a world suddenly meaningless compared to the fragile, trembling boy in Lena's arms. Victoria stepped away from him, the sharp click of her heels on the elevator, floor cutting through the tension like a knife. Her voice cracked as she spoke, raw and urgent. "Ross, you're not actually considering this. She left you. She hid a child. She ruined your life." Ross turned slowly, his movements deliberate, calculated, controlled. Yet, beneath the surface, fire roared, a mix of anger, disbelief, and protective instinct that threatened to ignite everything around him. His eyes, cold and unreadable, locked onto Victoria's. "My life? Or the image you wanted from it?" His voice was low, but the force behind it was undeniable, reverberating against the steel walls and making Victoria's confidence waver for the first time. The air between them was thick, electric, each second stretching painfully as both tried to dominate space in a world that was suddenly far too small to contain their emotions. Victoria stiffened further, her chest rising and falling rapidly as if she were readying herself for battle. "I'm your fiancée," she spat, her tone sharp, defiant, and desperate, trying to anchor herself to a status she suddenly feared was meaningless. Yet Ross's gaze never left the child, never left Lena, never wavered. He stepped closer, measured, deliberate, and yet filled with a tension that radiated danger. "And yet," he said, his words cutting through the elevator like a blade, "you're not the one standing here with a 3-year-old who looks exactly like me." The statement hung heavy, lingering in the metallic air, pressing into Victoria's chest like she was suffocating, and for the first time, she felt the brittle cracks in the foundation of her confidence. Her eyes widened slightly as the reality of the situation, the undeniable resemblance between Ross and Isaiah, the bond forming in the space between father and son, struck her with a force that left her momentarily speechless. Ross's eyes softened, but only just enough to show something between grief and longing, and Lena, sensing the escalation, whispered gently, her voice a fragile thread of reason amidst the storm, "Ross, don't fight with her in front of Isaiah." But Victoria, unsteady and fueled by fear and jealousy, snapped, "Don't pretend to care about what's appropriate now." Her voice rose, sharp, fracturing the heavy silence that had fallen after Lena's warning. Every word felt like glass cutting across skin, jagged and painful, impossible to ignore. Ross stepped between them, protective instinct blazing with clarity, his body an unyielding barrier between the child and the escalating tension of his fiancée's words. His voice was calm, but every syllable carried the authority and intensity of a man who had always commanded rooms, now turned inward to safeguard his son and the woman who had endured years of isolation to protect him. "Victoria, stop," he said firmly, and the sound of his voice cut through the chaos like a knife. For the first time, Victoria saw the truth she had avoided seeing for months, perhaps years. Ross had never truly belonged to her. Not fully. Not in a way that mattered. The realization hit her with the weight of humiliation, fury, and fear all at once. She stared at him, every carefully constructed defense collapsing as the undeniable truth took root in her mind. He wasn't hers, not completely, and the life she had envisioned with him was unraveling in real time, right there in the metallic confines of the elevator. Isaiah whimpered softly, sensing the tension, pressing his small body closer into Lena's chest. Lena's fingers brushed through his hair soothingly, a quiet, maternal gesture, but her eyes never left Ross, reading him, gauging him, trusting him, and Ross, feeling the pull of a father's instinct he hadn't anticipated so profoundly, allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, kneeling slightly to meet the boy at eye level. The movement didn't go unnoticed by Victoria, whose breath hitched sharply, her own sense of control slipping further with every passing second. Ross's voice, low and deliberate, carried a weight that Victoria could not counter. "I have a choice to make," he said softly, almost to himself, yet with clarity enough that Lena, Isaiah, and even Victoria could feel the gravity of the words. "And it isn't yours to make." Victoria's hands trembled as she instinctively reached for her phone, her fingers wrapping around the device as though it were a lifeline to an authority that could restore order in her collapsing reality. The air grew thick, charged, oppressive, each metallic groan of the elevator amplifying her urgency. Ross noticed the motion and moved faster, stepping subtly but decisively between her and the device, his eyes locking on hers with a forceful calm. "You don't get to involve anyone else," he said quietly, yet the authority in his tone left no room for negotiation. Victoria froze, her fingers hovering, eyes wide with disbelief and a fleeting sense of desperation. The elevator creaked again, the cables trembling with subtle protests that made Isaiah flinch, pressing closer to Lena, whispering a small, scared sound. Ross's gaze swept between the two women, and the weight of the situation, the truth, the betrayal, the fragile child, the unstoppable chaos, settled on him like a physical burden, yet he carried it with the inevitability of a man who would not back down. Lena's voice was steady but filled with unspoken fear, a fragile anchor amidst the storm. "Ross, she's trying to control it," she said softly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of plea and understanding. Ross didn't respond immediately, his mind spinning with the implications, the sudden collision of past and present, the unearthing of secrets buried too long. The metallic walls shivered slightly with another minor tremor, and Isaiah whimpered again, clutching Lena's collar as though sensing the approaching storm. Victoria's breath hitched, a trembling, sharp sound that echoed in the small space. And her fingers, which had just been poised over the phone, faltered, hesitating as though the gravity of Ross's unyielding stance had broken through her fear-based control. Ross finally exhaled, his jaw tight, his eyes softening only slightly as he knelt marginally closer to Isaiah, brushing the boy's curls back gently. His voice was calm, but firm, steady, and deliberate. The authority of a father and a man who had made hard decisions resonating in each word. "I will not let anyone decide my family for me," he said quietly, almost reverently, and the air in the elevator seemed to tighten around the weight of the declaration. Lena's hand tightened slightly on his, a small instinctive gesture of support and relief, and Isaiah's small hand tentatively reached out, brushing against Ross's arm, a moment of silent connection that made the metallic cage around them feel both oppressive and sacred. Victoria's eyes flicked between them, her face pale, lips parted in a silent gasp, and the realization began to settle fully. She had no power here. Not against the gravity of a father discovering his son, not against the truth he now chose to embrace. The elevator shuddered again, a subtle, almost taunting tremor that reminded everyone how precarious their situation was, how little control they actually held in that suspended box of steel. Ross's attention never wavered, never left the boy, never left Lena, but he remained acutely aware of Victoria's looming presence, of the fragile tension poised like a storm, ready to explode. He rose slightly, a deliberate motion that carried authority and care in equal measure, his eyes meeting Victoria's with a quiet, unwavering command. "Not here. Not now. Not ever again. If you call anyone, if you try to interfere, you will not control this moment. This is mine. Mine to decide." The weight of those words landed like a punch, leaving Victoria frozen, trembling, caught between panic and resignation, while Lena's quiet, unwavering gaze offered Ross silent validation, a fragile yet powerful tether in the chaos. Isaiah whined softly, shifting slightly against Lena, the boy's innocence stark against the storm of adult emotion surrounding him. Ross crouched slightly to whisper to him, the gentle authority of a father offering reassurance in the smallest, most intimate gestures. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "I'm right here. I won't let anything hurt you." Lena's chest rose and fell in silent relief, her eyes glistening, and for a brief, suspended moment, the chaos of betrayal, jealousy, and years of secrets softened in the presence of the father and child, recognizing one another. The elevator hummed quietly beneath them, the cables straining subtly, but the tension between the humans trapped inside held more weight than the steel surrounding them. Ross, finally rising to full height, allowed a quiet, hard glance at Victoria, a look that combined inevitability, warning, and finality in one unflinching sweep. He was done entertaining her authority. The moment belonged to the truth, to the boy, and to the mother who had fought silently for years to protect him. Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers as the elevator shuddered violently once more, the emergency lights flickering wildly, and a metallic screech above made Isaiah cry out, the sound carrying a chilling note that something or someone was dangerously close, threatening to shatter the fragile new order Ross had just begun to establish. The elevator hung in an eerie, suspended silence, the faint hum of the stalled machinery, a constant reminder of their entrapment, pressing everyone into a space far too small for the enormity of the emotions swirling inside it. Ross's gaze swept across the confined space, landing on Lena and Isaiah, the boy clinging to her like a life raft, his tiny frame trembling from the tension that had saturated every second since the elevator first stalled. The red glow of the emergency light flickered again, casting sharp, jagged shadows across Ross's face, illuminating every line of determination and anger that had etched themselves there over the past few intense minutes. Victoria, still clutching her phone, looked like a tempest trapped in porcelain, her perfect composure now crumbling under the weight of reality and helplessness. Her fingers trembled over the touchscreen as she hesitated for a fraction of a second before finally dialing, her voice quivering like glass, a fragile attempt at control. "Mrs. Callahan," she began, her tone desperate, sharp, and almost frantic. "You need to come to Skyrise. Now. It's about her." Ross's eyes snapped toward her, his jaw tightening so sharply that the muscles in his neck knotted under the tension. Without hesitation, without the slightest flicker of doubt, he snatched the phone from her hand with a speed that made Victoria flinch. His hand was firm, decisive, commanding, the kind of motion that left no room for argument. "Mom, don't come," he said sharply, his tone low, edged with authority, and yet carrying an undercurrent of emotion he did not fully control. "We need to talk privately." The metallic walls around them reflected his intensity back in sharp, fractured patterns, making the small space feel even smaller, even more suffocating. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, to protest, to insist on control. But Ross's unwavering gaze cut through her words before they even left her lips. He didn't need to raise his voice. The power behind his command was palpable, binding the air between them with iron certainty. But Ross's mother, a voice sharp as ice and dripping with authority even through the phone, ignored his plea entirely. "Ross," she said, her tone smooth yet cutting like a razor, "whatever she told you is a lie. That woman is poison. Don't listen to her." Each word landed in the cramped elevator like a weighted blow, resonating against the walls and bouncing in the ears of everyone trapped inside. Lena's jaw tightened instinctively, her arms circling Isaiah to shield him, to ground him, to hold him through the storm raging outside the fragile bubble of their little world. The boy whimpered softly, sensing the tension between the adults, pressing closer into Lena's chest for comfort. Lena's fingers trembled slightly as she whispered, her voice carrying enough to be caught on the speaker of the phone. "Tell him the truth." Her words, a mixture of plea and quiet desperation, cut through the rigid authority of Ross's mother like sunlight piercing a storm cloud. Silence hung for a breathless moment, and then his mother's icy, measured whisper came again, sharp enough to slice through metal and air alike. "Ross, do not let her manipulate you. If you care about your future, walk away from her now." The words were cold, deliberate, unyielding, designed to paralyze, to coerce, to control. The tremor of authority she carried over the phone wrapped around Ross like a vice, constricting, yet unable to dominate completely, because he had seen the truth, had felt it, had touched it in the small fingers of the child who was undeniably his own. Ross's hand trembled only slightly as he held the receiver away from himself, the silence that followed thick with emotion, with the impossibility of choice, with the weight of every decision made and deferred over the years. Finally, with a forceful exhale, he hung up the phone, letting it clatter softly in Victoria's hand, as if the sound itself marked the severing of a bond, a chain, and a control that had been imposed on him for far too long. His chest rose and fell heavily, breaths uneven but measured, the storm within him barely contained. Victoria stared at him, her lips parting in a fragile gasp, eyes wide with disbelief, fury, and fear. Her carefully constructed world, her plans, her certainty, all of it crumbled in that single act. The severing of her connection to the one person she had counted on to validate her position. "What are you going to do?" she demanded, her voice shaking, yet carrying the sharp edge of desperation that came from the fear of losing control, of losing influence over the man whose decisions had always seemed tethered to her desires. Ross looked at Lena first, then at Isaiah, letting his gaze linger over the child who had unknowingly become the center of a universe he had ignored for too long. His eyes softened with a tenderness that Victoria could not touch, could not infiltrate, a tenderness reserved solely for the boy who carried his eyes, his features, his blood. Then, without another word to Victoria, he turned back to the closed steel doors of the elevator, the faint hum of machinery vibrating beneath his feet like the heartbeat of the building itself. "First," he said, his voice calm yet resolute, "we get out of this elevator. Then I choose for myself." Each word landed with precision, clarity, and undeniable authority, and even Victoria's resolve faltered as the weight of the statement pressed down on her. The metallic walls creaked, subtly at first, then louder, as though echoing the tension contained within. The confined space itself, aware of the enormity of the decisions being made inside it. Isaiah stirred in Lena's arms, his soft whimpers fading into curiosity as he sensed Ross's protective presence. Lena's hand rested lightly on Ross's arm, a gesture of connection and solidarity, and Ross's eyes softened further, reflecting a resolve that seemed to strengthen with every heartbeat. The elevator trembled slightly, a subtle, foreboding vibration that made everyone tense again, as if the building itself was reacting to the choices being forged within it. Victoria instinctively gripped her phone tighter, her knuckles white, but hesitation had replaced certainty. She wanted to act, to assert, to regain control, yet Ross's calm decisiveness rendered her powerless in comparison. The storm she had tried to command now raged around her, outside her grasp, outside her influence. And then, faintly at first, they heard it. Footsteps. Not from above, not from the sides, but approaching, deliberate, echoing in the empty shaft just beyond the doors. Each step was precise, heavy yet controlled, carrying a weight of authority, of intent, and of potential confrontation. Isaiah's small whimpers returned, instinctively drawing Lena closer as her protective arms wrapped around him tighter. Ross's eyes narrowed, every sense heightened, muscles coiling as if preparing for battle, confrontation, or revelation. The sound of approaching footsteps was magnified by the enclosed space, bouncing off the steel walls, reverberating in rhythm with the pounding of Ross's own heart. Each step was closer, deliberate, and it brought with it the promise of interruption, of escalation, and the potential unearthing of truths even more volatile than those already revealed. Victoria's lips parted, ready to cry out, ready to dial again, ready to command. But Ross didn't flinch, didn't falter. His hand brushed lightly against Lena's back, a silent gesture of protection, of reassurance, and of shared purpose. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, more distinct, and the flickering emergency light cast moving shadows across the elevator walls, elongating the figures, distorting the scene, creating an almost surreal tension that made every heartbeat feel amplified. Isaiah's small fingers grasped Lena's shirt, instinctively sensing the storm, and Lena's own breaths came faster, shallower, but measured, controlled as she prepared for whatever or whoever was approaching. Ross's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the elevator, calculating, predicting, anticipating. Each moment stretched longer than the last, the metallic hum beneath their feet, now a background to the suspense that clung to every nerve. A sudden metallic click echoed from the elevator shaft, and Victoria flinched violently. Her body pressed slightly backward, as though trying to disappear. Ross remained steady, his presence an unyielding wall, his eyes fixed on the closed doors. The tension was palpable, almost tangible, wrapping around them like a living entity, each heartbeat synchronized with the approaching footsteps. Lena whispered softly to Isaiah, her voice barely audible but filled with calm authority. "Stay close, baby. Stay close to me." The boy pressed into her chest, tiny hands clutching at the folds of her dress as the sounds outside grew ever nearer, deliberate and unrelenting. Ross inhaled sharply, the calm before the storm, the decisive moment of choice, of action, of confronting forces beyond the elevator, but tied inextricably to their immediate reality. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every echoing footstep became a potential threat, a test, a challenge that would define the moments to come. The footsteps stopped suddenly. Just beyond the elevator doors, a shadow falling across the steel frame, as if the person or people outside were silently waiting for Ross's next move, holding the next piece of truth that would force him to act before the elevator doors could open. Isaiah whimpered softly, and the tension in the air became suffocating, leaving everyone poised on the knife edge between revelation and chaos. The elevator groaned, the metallic walls vibrating as the stalled machinery finally stirred with renewed purpose. A harsh metallic clang reverberated through the confined space, echoing in rhythm with the rapid heartbeat of everyone trapped inside. Ross's gaze darted to the faint glint of light outside the elevator doors, shadows moving like predators across the polished steel, each second stretching longer than the last. His hand still rested protectively on Lena's back, Isaiah clutching her chest like a lifeline, his tiny whimpers piercing the tension that had thickened around them like fog. The emergency lights flickered violently, casting distorted shadows that danced across the elevator walls as though mocking the fragile standoff inside. Ross could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force, a gravity far stronger than the metallic cage around them. Suddenly, the doors groaned under pressure, shifting apart as if reluctant to reveal the world outside. A technician's face appeared first, pale, tense, eyes flicking quickly across the interior before giving a nod to Ross, signaling that the doors would soon yield. As the steel parted, the light outside flooded in, blinding, harsh, and revealing a figure that made Ross's chest tighten and his mind catch in frozen disbelief. Standing there, arms crossed, her gaze like ice knives, was his mother. Her expression was carved from steel, deadly, impenetrable, radiating authority that demanded obedience. Victoria's fingers twitched instinctively, her phone forgotten in her other hand as she watched the scene unfold, her carefully controlled world slipping away with each flick of the mother's eyes. Lena instinctively stepped back, shielding Isaiah's small frame with the subtle yet forceful motion of a mother protecting her child, her arms forming a fragile barrier against the looming threat outside. Ross's mother's voice cut through the tension, sharp as glass breaking, cold enough to make the blood in Ross's veins tighten. "Ross," she said, every syllable deliberate, every word weighted with expectation and command, "hand the child to security." Her gaze swept over Lena, sharp, appraising, as though measuring weakness and vulnerability. Ross reacted instinctively, stepping in front of his son so quickly that Lena flinched, caught off guard by the protective force radiating from him. "No," he said, his voice low, measured, but carrying the undeniable authority of a man who had spent years building power and influence, and who now realized that nothing mattered more than the child standing before him. His mother's jaw dropped slightly, her composure momentarily fractured by the force of Ross's defiance. "You don't even know if he's yours," she said, disbelief and controlled fury mingling in her tone. Ross's eyes flared, a storm of emotion barely contained beneath a veneer of steel. "Then, let's find out," he snapped, his voice sharp, deliberate, leaving no room for argument or hesitation. The metallic walls seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the declaration, reverberating like an echo of every choice he had avoided over the years. Lena's hand trembled slightly, her voice breaking through the tension, though steadied by courage and necessity. "I'll do any test you want," she said quietly, yet with a strength that belied her fear. Her words hung in the air, charged with resolve, and even Isaiah, sensing the weight of the moment, pressed closer into her chest, small arms clutching at her as if bracing for the storm to come. His mother's eyes narrowed, and her gaze shifted sharply toward Victoria. "Get him away from her," she commanded. her tone sharp, slicing through the already tense air like a knife. Victoria, frozen for a fraction of a second, finally realized the magnitude of the reality she was entangled in. This was no longer a struggle about her, about appearances, about control. She stayed silent, her mouth parting in disbelief, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as the reality of Ross's unwavering choice became undeniable. For the first time, Victoria understood that she was not the protagonist in this moment. She was merely a pawn in a game far larger, far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Ross's hand found Lena's again, firm, grounding, a silent promise, and a declaration of his intent. "We're going somewhere private," he said, his voice low, steady, unflinching. "All of us." The statement hung in the air, a declaration of sovereignty over his own choices, over his child, over the truth that had been buried for too long. Lena nodded subtly, her grip on Isaiah tightening instinctively, signaling her trust and alignment without words. The faint metallic hum of the elevator seemed to respond, echoing their resolve, as if even the machinery recognized the monumental shift occurring within its steel confines. Ross's mother's eyes blazed with fury, her lips pressing into a thin line as she assessed the unfolding defiance. Every inch of her posture radiated danger, expectation, and authority. Yet Ross did not falter. His eyes, intense and unyielding, mirrored the storm raging inside him: anger, protection, love, and a relentless demand for truth. Every step he took toward asserting control, toward protecting his son and the woman who had endured so much for him, reverberated with the history of their lives, the secrets, the betrayals, the unspoken pain, and yet also with the power of new choices, new beginnings, and the undeniable force of paternal instinct finally unleashed. The small space of the private room they moved into was silent, except for the soft, measured breaths of Isaiah, the faint creak of the floor beneath their feet, and the low hum of tension vibrating in the air like a living entity. Ross's hand tightened slightly on Lena's, a grounding touch, a reassurance, a signal of unity and intent. His eyes never left his mother's, never left the force of authority she radiated, now challenged by the undeniable truth of his resolve. The tension, thick and almost suffocating, seemed to compress the air into a tangible weight, pressing down on Victoria's shoulders, on Lena's spine, and on Ross himself, each heartbeat synchronized with the anticipation of confrontation and revelation. Ross exhaled sharply, the sound cutting through the stillness of the room, a controlled release of energy before the storm. His voice, low, deliberate, and commanding, filled the space with the weight of inevitability. "I want the truth," he declared, each word resonating with authority, clarity, and unflinching resolve. Starting with a DNA test. The words, simple in structure, yet monumental in implication, hung in the air like a verdict, a challenge, and a promise simultaneously. Lena's eyes glistened. Isaiah shifted slightly, sensing the shift in tone and the gravity of the moment, and Victoria's shoulders slumped, the realization fully sinking in that she no longer held any power here. Outside the room, the faint echo of someone approaching, the sharp click of shoes on the polished floor, signaled that the confrontation was far from over. Ross's mother's glare darkened, her next move uncertain, while the tension in the private room thickened to a nearly unbearable density. Isaiah whimpered softly, sensing the danger lingering at the edges, as Ross's eyes locked on Lena's, silently promising protection, unity, and the truth that would soon be revealed. The world beyond the steel doors felt distant, irrelevant, as all that mattered now was the DNA test, the undeniable proof, and the reckoning that awaited them all. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit Ross the moment they entered the private room designated for testing, a sharp contrast to the suffocating metallic scent of the elevator. The walls were crisp, white, clinical, yet the tension in the room made it feel like a battlefield. not a medical space. Lena clutched Isaiah's small hand in hers, her fingers weaving through his, as if the connection alone could provide him strength and reassurance. Isaiah's big brown eyes darted nervously from Ross to the nurses moving around them, his tiny body trembling slightly, despite the warmth of Lena's protective embrace. Every movement Ross made sent subtle vibrations through the air, the way his presence dominated the room, leaving no space for hesitation. Each step he took felt deliberate, precise, calculated, yet powered by an emotional storm that threatened to spill over at any moment. The nurses moved, with quiet efficiency, their hands gentle but firm as they guided Isaiah to sit on a small examination chair. One by one, they explained in soft, professional tones what they were doing. But their words were like background noise to Ross's storming thoughts. He stood off to the side, pacing in small, deliberate circles, like a predator constrained within invisible walls, each step echoing softly against the tile floor. His eyes never left Lena, never left Isaiah, and never left the envelope of possibility that hung in the room, the truth waiting to emerge. Ross's jaw tightened with every second, his mind racing through what it would mean to confirm or deny the bond he had only just discovered. The weight of the unknown pressed down on him like a leaden force, every heartbeat a drum in the tension-filled silence. "If the test proves he's mine," Ross finally said, his voice low, steady, but carrying the edge of determination that could cut glass. "I'm taking responsibility today, not tomorrow." His words reverberated in the room, carrying authority, resolve, and the raw edge of emotion he had been holding back for years. Lena's hand squeezed Isaiah's gently, then brushed lightly against Ross's arm. A small yet deliberate touch that acknowledged his promise, his presence, and the storm of feelings that had been buried under years of distance, fear, and circumstance. She bit her lip, holding back tears, and whispered, almost as if to herself and the universe at once, "Ross, I never wanted money. I never wanted drama. I only wanted him safe." Her voice trembled, but there was a quiet strength in it that mirrored the determination in Ross's eyes. Ross stopped mid-step, his pacing ceasing as he approached Lena. Their faces were inches apart. Now, the heat of proximity magnifying every emotion, every unspoken word, every potential regret. His gaze locked onto hers, intense, unwavering, a mixture of longing, resolve, and the raw honesty of a man confronting the mistakes of the past. "I would have protected you both. I still will," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority, a pledge forged from pain, regret, and the awakening of a long-suppressed instinct. The words landed with impact not only on Lena but also on Victoria, who was watching from the corner of the room, her perfectly composed facade cracking under the force of their connection. Victoria's eyes widened, the anger and disbelief flooding through her like a tidal wave. She finally snapped, her voice sharp and desperate, cutting through the charged silence. "Ross, you're not seriously falling back into her arms." Her tone carried shock, disbelief, and frustration, the combination making her seem fragile yet forceful at the same time. Ross, however, did not flinch, did not divert his gaze, did not respond with anything but quiet determination. "I don't fall," he said, his tone precise, deliberate, carrying an undeniable finality. "I choose." The simple word resonated with power, reverberating in the sterile space like a hammer striking steel. And it left Victoria's carefully controlled demeanor crumbling, her face contorted into disbelief, frustration, and the quiet humiliation of realizing she was no longer the center of Ross's decisions. She stormed out of the room, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor like punctuation to the emotional declaration that had just occurred. Lena exhaled softly, her fingers tightening slightly around Ross's hand, and whispered, almost shyly but with quiet truth, "Ross." She loves you." His eyes softened for the briefest of moments as he looked down at Isaiah, then back to Lena. "Not the way you did," he answered quietly, deliberately, with honesty that cut through the lingering tension and laid bare the depth of his realization. Each word carried the weight of truth, of acknowledgement, of the first moment he had fully recognized what had always mattered most. Isaiah, sensing the calm but charged energy between them, pressed closer to Lena, his tiny fingers brushing Ross's arm as though instinctively recognizing the bond that had been denied to him for 3 years. The nurses moved with quiet efficiency, gently collecting the DNA samples, their hands professional but tender, aware of the tension in the room. Lena held Isaiah's hand the entire time, whispering soft reassurances, her voice calm but charged with urgency. Ross, meanwhile, paced like a caged storm, each step calculated, a physical manifestation of the mental tempest raging inside him. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicked from Lena to Isaiah repeatedly, and his mind raced, analyzing every possible scenario, every potential outcome of the test that would determine their immediate and permanent reality. The silence between the completed test and the lab result felt heavy, oppressive, thickening with each passing second, as though the walls themselves were waiting for the revelation to shatter them. Ross's mother's words from earlier echoed in his mind, yet he pushed them aside, focusing on the truth that was about to come, on the bond that could no longer be denied, and on the decisions he would make once the proof was undeniable. Lena's presence beside him was steadying, a silent anchor in the turbulent sea of his emotions. Isaiah's small body, trusting and vulnerable, reminded him that choices were not abstract. They carried lives, hearts, and futures. The air in the room seemed to hum with anticipation. Every small sound amplified the soft click of the nurse's instruments, the whisper of Lena's voice, the tiny shuffle of Isaiah's feet against the floor, and the quiet, almost imperceptible breathing of Ross as he braced for the truth. Then, the moment arrived. The lab technician, a calm, professional figure in contrast to the storm surrounding him, walked toward Ross and Lena, holding the sealed envelope containing the results. Each step the technician took echoed in the room like a drumbeat, each tap of the shoes against the tile a countdown to destiny. Ross's heart thudded loudly in his chest, a physical manifestation of every fear, hope, regret, and love that had led to this exact moment. Lena's hand gripped his, her knuckles white, yet steady, a silent declaration of trust, alignment, and shared anticipation. Isaiah looked up at Ross with wide, uncertain eyes, unaware of the weight of the document in the technician's hands, but instinctively knowing that it mattered. The envelope, small yet monumental, represented years of unanswered questions, unspoken pain, and unclaimed truths. The tension in the room was nearly unbearable, each breath synchronized with the silent thrum of anticipation. Ross inhaled deeply, his chest rising, his jaw set firmly, and then exhaled, steadying himself for the revelation. Lena's gaze locked with his, a mixture of fear, hope, and determination in her eyes. Isaiah, sensing the weight of the moment, pressed slightly closer to Lena, a small, instinctual gesture of trust. Every element of the room, the sterile walls, the humming lights, the soft sounds of the nurses faded into the background, leaving only the anticipation of truth, the approaching certainty of revelation, and the undeniable presence of family standing before destiny. The lab technician's hand paused just inches from Ross, the envelope heavy with consequence, every second stretched into eternity, Isaiah fidgeting slightly, Lena holding her breath, and Ross's pulse hammering in his ears. The room was frozen in suspense, the silence deafening, as the final truth teetered on the edge of exposure, ready to shatter illusions, confirm bonds, and ignite a chain of events that would redefine all their lives. The lab technician's hand lingered for a brief second before releasing the envelope, placing it carefully on the edge of the sterile counter. The soft click of the envelope against the metal surface seemed to echo like a drumbeat in the room, each sound amplified by the silence that followed. Ross's chest rose and fell sharply, his pulse hammering in his ears, every nerve on edge, every muscle coiled, as though he were ready to spring at any moment. Lena's knees shook beneath her, an almost imperceptible tremor at first, then more pronounced as the weight of anticipation bore down on her. Isaiah, sensing the tension and the heaviness of the moment, hid instinctively behind her leg, pressing into her for security, the small hands gripping her pants like a lifeline. The room felt suspended in time, a frozen frame of a life poised on the brink of irrevocable change. Ross's eyes scanned the envelope, taking in the sealed edges, the sterile weight of the paper, and the reality that within it lay a truth that could redefine every choice, every regret, every moment of absence he had endured. His hands were steady, almost unnaturally so. As he broke the seal, the slight tearing sound snapping through the charged silence like the first note of a symphony that had been building for years. The paper slid into his palm, light yet heavy with consequence, and he unfolded it carefully, each movement deliberate, his eyes absorbing every letter, every number, every calculated conclusion that would either confirm his fears or shatter his doubts. Isaiah's small body shifted nervously, the boy's fingers curling around Lena's skirt, his gaze flickering between Ross and the envelope in tentative curiosity. Lena's eyes were wide, brimming with unshed tears, and her breath came in shallow, anxious gasps, each inhale a delicate attempt to anchor herself against the emotional tide rising within her. She whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "It has to be true. It has to be him." Her voice trembled, but carried a note of hope, fragile, yet insistent. A quiet prayer under the fluorescent hum of the sterile room. Ross's hands hovered for a fraction longer before lifting the paper fully, scanning the results one more time, allowing the magnitude of the revelation to settle into the core of his being. Then he looked up. His eyes met Lena's, and the storm within them was not anger, not frustration, but something far deeper, a raw, shattering vulnerability, the opening of a heart long fortified by ego, ambition, and fear. His voice, when it finally came, was low, deliberate, and carrying the weight of irrevocable truth. "He's mine." The words landed softly, yet with undeniable impact, reverberating through the room and folding into every corner like a seismic shift. Lena exhaled, releasing a sob she had held inside for 3 long years, a sound that carried despair, relief, love, and apology all at once. Isaiah peeked out from behind her, his small face lighting up as he noticed the subtle shift in Ross, the gentleness in his eyes, the quiet reassurance radiating from his presence. Ross knelt slowly, careful not to startle Isaiah, and extended his arms toward the boy. "Hey, buddy." His voice softened, melodic, yet threaded with strength. "I'm your dad." The small hands of Isaiah hesitated for a brief moment, uncertain, then reached out instinctively, touching Ross's face with the kind of tentative familiarity only a child could give, as if some memory, some connection had always been there, waiting for acknowledgement. Ross felt a tremor of emotion ripple through him, a sudden swell of protectiveness, love, and longing that had been dormant, buried beneath years of distance, ambition, and unanswered questions. Lena's tears flowed freely now, her fingers brushing against Ross's cheek instinctively, a soft apology escaping her lips. "I'm sorry. I should have told you." Her voice cracked under the weight of years of secrecy, regret, and the raw vulnerability of being caught between love, fear, and necessity. Ross leaned closer, cupping her face with a tenderness that belied the storm that had just erupted inside him. His thumb brushed lightly across her cheekbone as he whispered, "You should have trusted me, but we're here now." The simplicity of the statement carried a power that no words could match. a reconciliation between past mistakes and the possibility of a future reclaimed. Isaiah, sensing the fragile intensity of the moment, nestled into Ross's chest, small arms wrapping around him in a quiet, instinctive embrace. Ross lifted the boy gently, one arm under his bottom, supporting him firmly, holding him close to his heart. The boy's tiny fingers touched Ross's jaw and cheek repeatedly, mapping the contours of the father he had never known, yet somehow instinctively recognized. Lena watched them, tears streaming freely now, a mix of relief, joy, and lingering guilt etched into every line of her face. She whispered softly, almost to herself and to Ross both, "We can finally start together." The room seemed to breathe around them, the fluorescent lights casting soft shadows across their entwined figures, the soft hum of machinery in the background, a gentle counterpoint to the storm of emotions. Ross's chest rose and fell steadily, each breath synchronized with Isaiah's small, rhythmic inhalations. Lena's hand rested lightly against Ross's back, a quiet, grounding presence, while her other arm supported Isaiah's small body. Every movement, every touch, every glance between them was charged with history, anticipation, and the delicate fragility of newly reclaimed connection. And then, the unexpected shattered the fragile calm. The heavy doors to the room swung open with a sudden, jarring force, the hinges groaning against the polished frame. Ross's head snapped toward the noise, his protective instinct immediately flaring. There, framed in the doorway, was his mother. Her expression dark, furious, almost incandescent with rage. Every feature of her face radiated cold authority and controlled fury, her eyes narrowing into slits as they landed on Lena and Isaiah, and finally on Ross. "Ross!" she barked, her voice cutting through the room like steel. "If you choose her and that child," she began, every syllable a threat, a warning, an ultimatum that seemed to compress the very air around them. Ross's body tensed, the small hairs on the back of his neck rising as he instinctively positioned himself between Lena and Isaiah and the force of his mother's wrath. His gaze locked with hers, unwavering, and the air in the room thickened, charged with confrontation, authority, and defiance. Lena held Isaiah close, whispering reassurances, her own voice steady despite the rising storm. Isaiah's small fingers clutched Ross's shirt, sensing the tension, sensing the invisible danger, yet trusting implicitly in the man who had just claimed him as his own. Ross's mother took a deliberate step closer, her presence like a wall of ice pressing down on the room. "You will lose everything," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Ross's jaw tightened, his hand gripping Lena's as he stood firm, the envelope of truth still resting nearby, evidence of a bond that could no longer be denied. Every heartbeat in the room seemed amplified, synchronized to the impending confrontation, as father, mother, and child faced the moment that would redefine every power, every loyalty, and every choice in their lives. The room hung suspended, charged, waiting for Ross's next move, the echo of destiny trembling in the air, poised on the edge of irrevocable change. The silence in the room was suffocating, almost tangible. After the storm of revelation that had erupted in the DNA room, Ross's mother stood rigid in the doorway, her posture a mixture of authority and controlled fury, eyes locked on Lena as if she were some intruder, threatening to dismantle everything she had built, everything she had demanded of her son. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the kind that signaled a storm barely contained, a warning that thundered louder than any spoken words. "If you choose her and that child, Ross," she began, each syllable deliberate, venomous, precise, "you lose everything, your position, your company, your inheritance, everything." Her gaze shifted from Lena to Isaiah, who clung to Lena's leg, oblivious to the strategic warfare of adult power unfolding around him, yet sensing the tension as instinctively as any child might. Ross's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time in years, his gaze did not waver before his mother. There was no trace of fear, no hint of obedience, only a raw, unbroken defiance that radiated from his every movement, every line of his body. He stepped closer to Lena and Isaiah, his hand brushing Lena's fingers, intertwining them as if to anchor the small, fragile family in the midst of the storm. "Then I lose it," Ross said, his voice low but carrying a weight that demanded acknowledgement. The simplicity of the words belied their profundity. The ultimate decision crystallized in a sentence that shattered the expectations of every adult in the room. His mother froze, as if the air itself had been knocked from her lungs, her eyes widening imperceptibly in disbelief. "Ross," she began, a voice sharp with authority, yet faltering for the first time in decades. But Ross did not flinch, did not step back, did not allow her words to pull him into old patterns of fear and obligation. He stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between them, his gaze steady, unwavering, and filled with the kind of clarity that comes only after long years of indecision, heartbreak, and realization. "Because I'm done choosing money over people who love me," he stated. The cadence deliberate, unyielding, and final. The words echoed in the sterile room, reverberating off the walls like a clarion call to truth, a manifesto of newfound priorities and the reclamation of a life once dictated by obligations and ego. Lena's voice trembled as she looked up at him, her lips parted with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Ross, you don't have to destroy your life for us," she whispered, her tone broken, yet full of quiet strength, a plea that carried years of suppressed emotion and hope. Ross gently lifted her chin with a hand that had been roughened by years of business battles, yet softened now by love, care, and intention. "It isn't destruction," he said, his voice soft, yet imbued with unshakable authority. "It's the first real decision I've made in years." Each word held weight, gravity, and truth, a sharp contrast to the corporate-controlled persona he had maintained for so long. Isaiah, sensing the shift in energy, reached up instinctively, his tiny fingers brushing against Ross's chest. Without hesitation, Ross scooped the boy into his arms, cradling him with a tenderness that radiated protection, ownership, and deep, unspoken love. Lena's hand found his, squeezing tightly, as if to affirm the fragile yet undeniable bond that had reformed in that room. Ross held them both, his son, his love, the pieces of his life that had been absent for far too long, against his chest, a quiet declaration that everything else, the world, the wealth, the expectations, were secondary to the family standing before him. Ross's mother recoiled slightly, her posture faltering as she took a tentative step backward. For once, she was confronted not with a son who obeyed her commands blindly, but with a man who had chosen, deliberately and irrevocably, the people who mattered most to him. Her words, once sharp with authority, now seemed powerless in the face of the strength, truth, and unity displayed before her. The tension in the room thickened, palpable and electric, as the unspoken war between inheritance and love reached its quiet, irrevocable conclusion. Lena's eyes glistened with tears that reflected relief, hope, and the unspoken acknowledgement of years of waiting. "What now? What now?" she asked softly, voice trembling, her body pressed close to Ross, sharing warmth and reassurance. Ross pressed his forehead gently to hers, a silent bridge between the storms of the past and the promise of the future. "Now," he whispered back, his voice quiet, steady, and firm. "I take you home, and then we rebuild everything together." Each word carried commitment, vision, and a reclamation of the life they had been denied, a blueprint for the family they would now forge in unity, trust, and love. Isaiah, nestled against Ross's chest, giggled softly, his small hands patting Ross's shoulder in delight and recognition. Ross's own lips curled into a rare, genuine smile, the kind that comes only from complete emotional surrender, acceptance, and joy. Lena mirrored it, tears flowing freely now, but the weight of the past lifted slightly, leaving space for hope, warmth, and a future they could now claim together. The room, once a battlefield of tension, authority, and suppressed emotion, now felt alive with possibility. The sterile walls replaced in their minds with the quiet promise of home, of family, of life, finally chosen on their own terms. Ross's mother, still frozen at the threshold, finally found her voice, a whisper of disbelief escaping her lips. You're willing to throw it all away?" Ross didn't flinch. He tightened his hold on Isaiah and Lena, feeling the heartbeat of his family against his chest. "I'm not throwing anything away," he replied evenly, truthfully. "I'm gaining everything that matters." Every syllable was a hammer strike against old expectations, a declaration of independence from a lifetime of imposed values, and a statement of what truly counted: love, family, loyalty, and presence. The final tension in the room dissipated like a fading storm. Ross led Lena and Isaiah out of the lab quietly, confidently, with every step leaving behind the echoes of a past dictated by others. The sterile hallway gave way to the soft warmth of natural light streaming through the windows of Skyrise Tower, sunlight illuminating the future they would now embrace. Each step, each breath, each glance between them was deliberate. A silent vow to nurture, protect, and cherish the family that had been fragmented but now whole. Ross held the boy in one arm, Lena's hand in the other, their shadows stretching long across the polished floor as they moved with calm certainty toward the elevator that would take them down, out of the tension, and into the life they had reclaimed. The world outside awaited, uncertain. But Ross knew it no longer held the power to dictate his choices. His heart, once bound by fear, obligation, and corporate expectation, now beat in rhythm with the tiny life nestled against him and the woman who had always been his anchor, his truth, and his home. And that night, Ross made a decision that changed all three of their lives forever. A choice of love over legacy, family over fortune, truth over fear, and a future built not on obligation, but on the bond they had finally claimed as their own. The city lights twinkled outside, indifferent to the small yet monumental revolution that had occurred in a quiet room above it, as a father, a mother, and a son took their first steps into the life they had always deserved, together. Wow! What a journey! Ross, Lena, and little Isaiah have shown us that love, family, and truth are worth more than anything money or power can buy. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it did theirs. If you felt every emotion with them, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond Color Stories so you never miss a story that moves you. Thank you for watching. And remember, the most powerful moments in life are the ones we choose to fight for.